Sometimes we're subjected to things in this world that are so fantastical and at times thoroughly unbelievable that you have got to say to yourself, there just has to be something else going on here. This couldn't possibly be the normal, could it? When it comes to the New World Order and its shadow of power, that really depends on who it is you're asking. Is the truth really out there? Let's see if we can shed some light on it. The New World Order, or NWO, is claimed to be an emerging clandestine totalitarian world government by various theories. The common theme in theories about a New World Order is that a secretive power elite with a globalist agenda is planning to eventually rule the world through an authoritarian world government which will replace sovereign nation states, and an all-encompassing propaganda whose ideology hails the establishment of the New World Order as the culmination of history's progress. Many influential historical and contemporary figures have therefore been purported to be part of a cabal that operates through many front organizations to orchestrate significant political and financial events, ranging from causing systemic crises to pushing through controversial policies at both national and international levels as steps in an ongoing plot to achieve world domination. Before the early 1990s, New World Order conspiracism was limited to two American countercultures, primarily the militantly anti-government right, and secondarily that part of fundamentalist Christianity concerned with the end-time emergence of the Antichrist. Skeptics such as Michael Barkan and Chip Burlett observed that right-wing populist theories about a New World Order had not only been embraced by many seekers of stigmatized knowledge, but had seeped into popular culture, thereby inaugurating a period during the late 20th and early 21st centuries in the United States where people are actively preparing for apocalyptic millenarian scenarios. Those political scientists are concerned that mass hysteria over New World Order theories could eventually have devastating effects on American political life, ranging from escalating lone wolf terrorism to the rise to power of authoritarian ultra-nationalist demagogues. During the 20th century, political figures such as Woodrow Wilson and Winston Churchill used the term New World Order to refer to a new period of history characterized by a dramatic change in world political thought and in the global balance of power after World War I and World War II. The interwar and post-World War II periods were seen as opportunities to implement idealistic proposals for global governance by collective efforts to address worldwide problems that go beyond the capacity of individual nation-states to resolve, while nevertheless respecting the right of nations to self-determination. Such collective initiatives manifested in the formation of intergovernmental organizations such as the League of Nations in 1920, the United Nations in 1945, and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in 1949, along with international regimes such as the Bretton Woods system and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, implemented to maintain a cooperative balance of power and facilitate reconciliation between nations to prevent the prospect of another global conflict. These cosmopolitan efforts to instill liberal internationalism were regularly criticized and opposed by American paleoconservative business nationalists from the 1930s onwards. Progressives welcomed international organizations and regimes such as the United Nations in the aftermath of the two world wars, but argued that these initiatives suffered from a democratic deficit and were therefore inadequate not only to prevent another world war, but to foster global justice, as the UN was chartered to be a free association of sovereign nation-states rather than a transition to democratic world government. Thus, cosmopolitan activists around the globe, perceiving the IGOs as too ineffectual for global change, formed a world federalist movement. British writer and futurist H.G. Wells went further than progressives in the 1940s by appropriating and redefining the term New World Order as a synonym for the establishment of a technocratic world state and of a planned economy, garnering popularity in state socialist circles. During the Second Red Scare, both secular and religious right American agitators, largely influenced by the work of Canadian theorist William Guy Carr, increasingly embraced and spread dubious fears of Freemasons, Illuminati and Jews as the alleged driving forces behind an international communist scheme. The threat of godless communism, in the form of an atheistic, bureaucratic, collectivist world government, demonized as the Red Menace, became the focus of apocalyptic millenarian conspiracism. The Red Scare came to shape one of the core ideas of the political right in the United States, which is that liberals and progressives, with their welfare state policies and international cooperation programs, such as foreign aid and open borders, supposedly contribute to a gradual process of global collectivism that will inevitably lead to nations being replaced with a communistic collectivist one-world government. Right-wing populist advocacy groups with a paleo-conservative worldview, such as the John Birch Society, disseminated a multitude of theories in the 1960s, claiming that the governments of both the United States and the Soviet Union were controlled by a cabal of corporate internationalists, greedy bankers and corrupt politicians who were intent on using the UN as the vehicle to create a one-world government. This anti-globalist conspiracism fueled the campaign for US withdrawal from the UN. American writer Mary M. Davison, in her 1966 booklet The Profound Revolution, traced the alleged New World Order theory to the establishment of the US Federal Reserve in 1913 by international bankers, whom she claimed later formed the Council on Foreign Relations in 1921 as a shadow government. At the time the booklet was published, many readers would have interpreted international bankers as a reference to a postulated international Jewish banking theory masterminded by the Rothschild family. Arguing that the term New World Order is used by a secretive global elite dedicated to the eradication of the sovereignty of the world's nations, American writer Gary Allen, in his books None Dare Call It Conspiracy, Rockefeller Campaigning for the New World Order 1974, and Say No to the New World Order, articulated the anti-globalist theme of contemporary right-wing conspiracism in the US. After the fall of communism in the early 1990s, the de facto subject of New World Order conspiracism shifted from crypto-communists, perceived to be plotting to establish an atheistic world communist government, to globalists, perceived to be plotting to generally implement a collectivist, unified world government, ultimately controlled by an untouchable oligarchy of international bankers, corrupt politicians, and corporatists, or alternatively, the United Nations itself. The shift in perception was inspired by growing opposition to corporate internationalism on the American right in the 1990s. In his speech, Toward a New World Order, delivered on September the 11th, 1990 during a joint session of the US Congress, President George H.W. Bush described his objectives for post-Cold War global governance in cooperation with post-Soviet states. Until now, the world we've known has been a world divided, a world of barbed wire and concrete block, conflict and Cold War, said Bush.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations.
Now we can see a new world coming into view, a world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order. In the words of Winston Churchill, a world order in which the principles of justice and fair play protect the weak against the strong. A world where the United Nations, freed from Cold War stalemate, is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders. A world in which freedom and respect for human rights find a home among all nations. The New York Times observed that progressives were denouncing this New World Order as a rationalization of American imperial ambitions in the Middle East at the time, while conservatives rejected any new security arrangements altogether and fulminated about any possibility of a UN revival. Chip Burlett, an American investigative reporter specializing in the study of right-wing movements in the US, wrote that the Christian and secular far right were especially terrified by Bush's speech. Fundamentalist Christian groups interpreted Bush's words as signaling the end times, while more secular theorists approached it from an anti-communist and anti-collectivist standpoint, and feared for a hegemony over all countries by the United Nations. American televangelist Pat Robertson, with his 1991 best-selling book The New World Order, became the most prominent Christian disseminator of theories about recent American history. He describes a scenario where Wall Street, the Federal Reserve System, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, and the Trilateral Commission control the flow of events from behind the scenes, nudging people constantly and covertly in the direction of world government for the Antichrist. It was observed that, throughout the 1990s, the galvanizing language used by theorists such as Linda Thompson, Mark Kerniker, and Robert K. Speer led to militancy and the rise of the militia movement. The militia movement's anti-government ideology was, and is, spread through speeches at rallies and meetings, books and videotapes sold at gun shows, shortwave and satellite radio, fax networks, and computer bulletin boards. It has been argued that it was overnight AM radio shows and propagandist viral content on the internet that most effectively contributed to more extremist responses to the perceived threat of the New World Order. This led to the substantial growth of New World Order conspiracism, with it retroactively finding its way into the previously apolitical literature of numerous Kennedy assassinologists, ufologists, lost land theorists, and occultists, partially inspired by fears surrounding the Satanic Panic. From the mid-1990s onwards, the amorphous appeal of those subcultures transmitted New World Order conspiracism to a larger audience of seekers of stigmatized knowledge, with the common characteristic of disillusionment of political efficacy. From the mid-1990s to the early 2000s, Hollywood conspiracy thriller television shows and films also played a role in introducing a general audience to various fringe and esoteric theories related to New World Order conspiracism, which by that point had developed to include black helicopters, FEMA concentration camps, and the like, theories which for decades previously were confined to largely right-wing subcultures. The 1993 to 2002 television series The X-Files, the 1997 film Conspiracy Theory, and the 1998 film The X-Files Fight the Future are often cited as notable examples. Following the start of the 21st century, and specifically during the late 2000s financial crisis, many politicians and pundits, such as Gordon Brown and Henry Kissinger, used the term New World Order in their advocacy for a comprehensive reform of the global financial system and their calls for a new Bretton Woods, taking into account emerging markets such as China and India. These public declarations reinvigorated New World Order conspiracism, culminating in talk show host Sean Hannity stating on his Fox News Channel program Hannity that the theorists were right. Progressive media watchdog groups have repeatedly criticized Fox News in general, and its now defunct opinion show Glenn Beck in particular, for not only disseminating New World Order theories to mainstream audiences, but possibly agitating so-called lone wolf extremism, particularly from the radical right. In 2009, American film directors Luke Meyer and Andrew Neil released New World Order, a critically acclaimed documentary film which explores the world of theorists, such as American radio host Alex Jones, who consistently expose and vigorously oppose what they perceive as an emerging New World Order. The growing dissemination and popularity of theories has also created an alliance between right-wing agitators and hip-hop music's left-wing rappers, such as KRS-One, Professor Griff of Public Enemy, and Immortal Technique, illustrating how anti-elitist conspiracism can create unlikely political allies in efforts to oppose a political system. There are numerous systemic theories through which the concept of a New World Order is viewed. Let's deep dive into a few of the major ones. Since the 19th century, many apocalyptic millennial Christian eschatologists, starting with John Nelson Darby, have predicted a globalist theory to impose a tyrannical New World Order governing structure as the fulfillment of prophecies about the end time in the Bible, specifically in the book of Ezekiel, the book of Daniel, the Olivet Discourse found in the Synoptic Gospels, and the book of Revelation. They claim that people who have made a deal with the devil to gain wealth and power have become pawns in a supernatural chess game to move humanity into accepting a utopian world government that rests on the spiritual foundations of a syncretic messianic world religion, which will later reveal itself to be a dystopian world empire that imposes the imperial cult of an unholy trinity of Satan, the Antichrist, and the false prophet. In many contemporary Christian theories, the false prophet will be either the last pope of the Catholic Church, groomed and installed by an Alta Vendita or Jesuit plot, a guru from the New Age movement, or even the leader of an elite fundamentalist Christian organization like the Fellowship, while the Antichrist will be either the President of the European Union, the Secretary General of the United Nations, or even the Caliph of a pan-Islamic state. Some of the most vocal critics of end-time theories come from within Christianity. In 1993, historian Bruce Barron wrote a stern rebuke of apocalyptic Christian conspiracism in the Christian Research Journal when reviewing Robertson's 1991 book, The New World Order. Another critique can be found in historian Gregory S. Camp's 1997 book, Selling Fear, Conspiracy Theories and End-Time Paranoia. Religious studies scholar Richard T. Hughes argues that New World Order rhetoric libels the Christian faith, since the New World Order, as defined by Christian theorists, has no basis in the Bible whatsoever. Furthermore, he argues that not only is this idea unbiblical, it is positively anti-biblical and fundamentally anti-Christian, because by misinterpreting key passages in the book of Revelation, it turns a comforting message about the coming kingdom of God into one of fear, panic, and despair in the face of an allegedly approaching one-world government. Progressive Christians, such as preacher-theologian Peter J. Gomez, caution Christian fundamentalists that a spirit of fear can distort scripture and history through dangerously combining biblical literalism, apocalyptic timetables, demonization, and oppressive prejudices, while Camp warns of the very real danger that Christians could pick up some extra spiritual baggage by credulously embracing theories. They therefore call on Christians who indulge in conspiracism to repent. Freemasonry is one of the world's oldest secular fraternal organizations and arose during the late 16th and early 17th century Britain. Over the years, a number of allegations and theories have been directed towards Freemasonry, including the allegation that Freemasons have a hidden political agenda and are plotting to bring about a new world order, a world government organized according to Masonic principles or governed only by Freemasons. The esoteric nature of Masonic symbolism and rites led to Freemasons first being accused of secretly practicing Satanism in the late 18th century. The original allegation of a scheme within Freemasonry to subvert religions and governments in order to take over the world traces back to Scottish author John Robison, whose reactionary theories crossed the Atlantic and influenced outbreaks of Protestant anti-Masonry in the United States during the 19th century. In the 1890s, French writer Léo Taxil wrote a series of pamphlets and books denouncing Freemasonry and charging their lodges with worshipping Lucifer as the supreme being and great architect of the universe. Despite the fact that Taxil admitted that his claims were all a hoax, they were, and still are, believed and repeated by numerous theorists, and had a huge influence on subsequent anti-Masonic claims about Freemasonry. Some theorists eventually speculated that some founding fathers of the United States, such as George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, were having Masonic sacred geometric designs interwoven into American society, particularly in the Great Seal of the United States $1 bill, the architecture of national mall landmarks, and the streets and highways of Washington, D.C. as part of a master plan to create the first Masonic government as a model for the coming New World Order. Freemasons rebut these claims of a Masonic plotting. Freemasonry, which promotes rationalism, places no power in occult symbols themselves, and it is not a part of its principles to view the drawing of symbols, no matter how large, as an act of consolidating or controlling power. Furthermore, there is no published information establishing the Masonic membership of the men responsible for the design of the Great Seal. While theorists assert that there are elements of Masonic influence on the Great Seal of the United States, and that these elements were intentionally or unintentionally used because the creators were familiar with the symbols, in fact, the all-seeing Eye of Providence and the unfinished pyramid were symbols used as much outside Masonic lodges as within them in the late 18th century. Therefore, the designers were drawing from common esoteric symbols. The Latin phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum, appearing on the reverse side of the Great Seal since 1782 and on the back of the $1 bill since 1935, translates to New Order of the Ages and alludes to the beginning of an era where the United States of America is an independent nation-state. It is often mistranslated by theorists as New World Order. Although the European continental branch of Freemasonry has organizations that allow political discussion within their Masonic lodges, Masonic researcher Trevor W. McEwen argues that the accusations ignore several facts. Firstly, the many grand lodges are independent and sovereign, meaning they act on their own and do not have a common agenda. The points of belief of the various lodges often differ. Secondly, famous individual Freemasons have always held views that span the political spectrum and show no particular pattern or preference. As such, the term Masonic government is erroneous. There is no consensus among Freemasons about what an ideal government would look like. The Order of the Illuminati was an Enlightenment-age secret society founded by university professor Adam Weishaupt on May 1, 1776, in Upper Bavaria, Germany. The movement consisted of advocates of free thought, secularism, liberalism, republicanism, and gender equality, recruited from the German Masonic lodges, who sought to teach rationalism through mystery schools. In 1785, the order was infiltrated, broken up, and suppressed by the government agents of Charles Theodore, Elector of Bavaria, in his preemptive campaign to neutralize the threat of secret societies ever becoming hotbeds of schemes to overthrow the Bavarian monarchy and its state religion, Roman Catholicism. There is no evidence that the Bavarian Illuminati survived its suppression in 1785. In the late 18th century, reactionary theorists, such as Scottish physicist John Robison and French Jesuit priest Augustin Barruel, began speculating that the Illuminati had survived their suppression and become the masterminds behind the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror. The Illuminati were accused of being subversives who were attempting to secretly orchestrate a revolutionary wave in Europe and the rest of the world in order to spread the most radical ideas and movements of the Enlightenment, anti-clericalism, anti-monarchism, and anti-patriarchalism, and to create a world noocracy and cult of reason. During the 19th century, fear of an Illuminati plot was a real concern of the European ruling classes, and the oppressive reactions to this unfounded fear provoked in 1848 the very revolutions they sought to prevent. During the interwar period of the 20th century, fascist propagandists, such as British revisionist historian Nestor Helen Webster and American socialite Edith Starr Miller, not only popularized the myth of an Illuminati plot, but claimed that it was a subversive secret society which served the Jewish elites that supposedly propped up both finance capitalism and Soviet communism in order to divide and rule the world. American evangelist Gerald Burton Winrod and other theorists within the fundamentalist Christian movement in the United States, which emerged in the 1910s as a backlash against the principles of Enlightenment, secular humanism, modernism, and liberalism, became the main channel of dissemination of Illuminati theories in the US. Right-wing populists, such as members of the John Birch Society, frequently began speculating that some collegiate fraternities, gentlemen's clubs, and think tanks of the American upper class are front organizations of the Illuminati, which they accuse of plotting to create a new world order through a one-world government. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is an anti-Semitic canard, originally published in Russian in 1903, alleging a Judeo-Masonic scheme to achieve world domination. The text purports to be the minutes of the secret meetings of a cabal of Jewish masterminds, which has co-opted Freemasonry and is plotting to rule the world on behalf of all Jews, because they believe themselves to be the chosen people of God. The protocols incorporate many of the core themes outlined in the Robison and Barrowell attacks on the Freemasons, and overlay them with anti-Semitic allegations about anti-Tsarist movements in Russia. The protocols reflect themes similar to more general critiques of Enlightenment liberalism by conservative aristocrats who support monarchies and state religions. The interpretation intended by the publication of the protocols is that if one peels away the layers of the Masonic plotting past the Illuminati, one finds the rotten Jewish core. Numerous polemicists, such as Irish journalist Philip Graves in a 1921 article in The Times, and British academic Norman Cohn in his 1967 book Warrant for Genocide, have proven the protocols to be both a hoax and a clear case of plagiarism. There is general agreement that Russian-French writer and political activist Matvey Golovinsky fabricated the text for Okhrana, the secret police of the Russian Empire, as a work of counter-revolutionary propaganda prior to the 1905 Russian Revolution by plagiarizing, almost word for word in some passages, from the dialogue in Hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu, a 19th century satire against Napoleon III of France, written by French political satirist and legitimist militant Maurice Joly. Responsible for feeding many anti-Semitic and anti-Masonic mass hysterias of the 20th century, the protocols have been influential in the development of some theories, including some New World Order theories, and appears repeatedly in certain contemporary literature. For example, the authors of the 1982 controversial book The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail concluded that the Protocols was the most persuasive piece of evidence for the existence and activities of the Priory of Sion. They speculated that this secret society was working behind the scenes to establish a theocratic United States of Europe. Politically and religiously unified through the imperial cult of a Merovingian great monarch, supposedly descended from a Jesus bloodline, who occupies both the throne of Europe and the Holy See, this Holy European Empire would become the hyperpower of the 21st century. Although the Priory of Sion itself has been exhaustively debunked by journalists and scholars as a hoax, some apocalyptic millenarian Christian eschatologists who believe the protocols is authentic became convinced that the Priory of Sion was a fulfillment of prophecies found in the Book of Revelation, and further proof of an anti-Christian plan of epic proportions, signalling the imminence of a new world order. Skeptics argue that the current gambit of contemporary theorists who use the protocols is to claim that they really come from some group other than the Jews, such as fallen angels or alien invaders. Although it is hard to determine whether the conspiracy-minded actually believe this, or are simply trying to sanitize a discredited text, skeptics argue that it does not make much difference, since they leave the actual anti-Semitic text unchanged. The result is to give the protocols credibility and circulation. During the second half of Britain's imperial century between 1815 and 1914, English-born South African businessman, mining magnate and politician Cecil Rhodes advocated the British Empire re-annexing the United States of America and reforming itself into an imperial federation to bring about a hyperpower and lasting world peace. In his first will, written in 1877 at the age of 23, he expressed his wish to fund a secret society, known as the Society of the Elect, that would advance the following goal: to and for the establishment, promotion, and development of a secret society, the true aim and object whereof shall be the extension of British rule throughout the world, the perfecting of a system of emigration from the United Kingdom, and a colonization by British subjects of all lands where the means of livelihood are attainable by energy, labour, and enterprise, and especially the occupation by British settlers of the entire continent of Africa, the Holy Land, the valley of the Euphrates, the islands of Cyprus and Candia, the whole of South America, the islands of the Pacific not heretofore possessed by Great Britain, the whole of the Malay archipelago, the seaboard of China and Japan, the ultimate recovery of the United States of America as an integral part of the British Empire, the inauguration of a system of colonial representation in the Imperial Parliament, which may tend to weld together the disjointed members of the Empire, and finally, the foundation of so great a power as to render wars impossible and promote the best interests of humanity. In 1890, 13 years after his now famous will, Rhodes elaborated on the same idea, establishment of England everywhere, which would ultimately lead to the cessation of all wars and one language throughout the world. The only thing feasible to carry out this idea is a secret society gradually absorbing the wealth of the world and human minds of the higher order to be devoted to such an object. Rhodes also concentrated on the Rhodes Scholarship, which had British statesman Alfred Milner as one of its trustees. Established in 1902, the original goal of the Trust Fund was to foster peace among the great powers by creating a sense of fraternity and a shared world view among future British, American and German leaders by having enabled them to study for free at the University of Oxford. Milner and British official Lionel George Curtis were the architects of the Round Table movement, a network of organisations promoting closer union between Britain and its self-governing colonies. To this end, Curtis founded the Royal Institute of International Affairs in June 1919, and with his 1938 book The Commonwealth of God, began advocating for the creation of an imperial federation that eventually re-annexes the US, which would be presented to Protestant churches as being the work of the Christian God to elicit their support. The Commonwealth of Nations was created in 1949, but it would only be a free association of independent states, rather than the powerful imperial federation imagined by Rhodes, Milner and Curtis. The Council on Foreign Relations began in 1917 with a group of New York academics who were asked by President Woodrow Wilson to offer options for the foreign policy of the United States in the interwar period. Originally envisioned as a group of American and British scholars and diplomats, some of whom belonging to the Round Table movement, it was a subsequent group of 108 New York financiers, manufacturers and international lawyers, organized in June 1918 by Nobel Peace Prize recipient and US Secretary of State Elihu Root, that became the Council on Foreign Relations on the 29th of July 1921. The first of the Council's projects was a quarterly journal launched in September 1922 called Foreign Affairs. The Trilateral Commission was founded in July 1973 at the initiative of American banker David Rockefeller, who was chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations at that time. It is a private organization established to foster closer cooperation among the United States, Europe and Japan. The Trilateral Commission is widely seen as a counterpart to the Council on Foreign Relations. In the 1960s, right-wing populist individuals and groups with a paleo-conservative worldview, such as members of the John Birch Society, were the first to combine and spread a business nationalist critique of corporate internationalists, networked through think tanks such as the Council on Foreign Relations, with a grand theory casting them as front organizations for the Round Table of the Anglo-American establishment, which are financed by an international banking cabal that has supposedly been plotting from the late 19th century onwards to impose an oligarchic New World Order through a global financial system. Anti-globalist theorists, therefore, fear that the international bankers are planning to eventually subvert the independence of the US by subordinating national sovereignty to a strengthened bank for international settlements. The research findings of historian Carroll Quigley, author of the 1966 book Tragedy and Hope, are taken by both theorists of the American Old Right and New Left to substantiate this view, even though Quigley argued that the establishment is not involved in a plot to implement a one-world government, but rather British and American benevolent imperialism driven by the mutual interests of economic elites in the United Kingdom and the United States. Quigley also argued that, although the Round Table still exists today, its position in influencing the policies of world leaders has been much reduced from its heyday during World War I and slowly waned after the end of World War II and the Suez Crisis. Today, the Round Table is largely a ginger group, designed to consider and gradually influence the policies of the Commonwealth of Nations, but faces strong opposition. Furthermore, in American society in 1965, the problem, according to Quigley, was that no elite was in charge and acting responsibly. Larry MacDonald, the second president of the John Birch Society and a conservative Democratic member of the United States House of Representatives, who represented the 7th Congressional District of Georgia, wrote a foreword for Allen's 1976 book The Rockefeller File, wherein he claimed that the Rockefellers and their allies were driven by a desire to create a one-world government that combined supercapitalism with communism and would be fully under their control. He saw a plot that was international in scope, generations old in planning, and incredibly evil in intent. In his 2002 autobiography Memoirs, David Rockefeller wrote, "For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of planning with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it." Barkan argues that this statement is partly facetious. The statement, however, is taken at face value and widely cited by theorists as proof that the Council on Foreign Relations uses its role as the brain trust of American presidents, senators, and representatives to manipulate them into supporting a new world order in the form of a one-world government. In a November 13, 2007 interview with Canadian journalist Benjamin Fulford, Rockefeller countered that he felt no need for a world government and wished for the governments of the world to work together and collaborate. He also stated that it seemed neither likely nor desirable to have only one elected government rule the world. He criticized accusations of him being ruler of the world as nonsensical. Some American social critics, such as Lawrence H. Shoup, argue that the Council on Foreign Relations is an imperial brain trust, which has, for decades, played a central behind-the-scenes role in shaping US foreign policy choices for the post-World War II international order and the Cold War by determining what options show up on the agenda and what options do not even make it to the table. Others, such as G. William Domhoff, argue that it is in fact a mere policy discussion forum, which provides the business input to US foreign policy planning. Domhoff argues that it has nearly 3,000 members, far too many for secret plans to be kept within the group. All the council does is sponsor discussion groups, debates, and speakers. As far as being secretive, it issues annual reports and allows access to its historical archives. However, all these critics agree that historical studies of the CFR show that it has a very different role in the overall power structure than what is claimed by theorists. In his 1928 book The Open Conspiracy, British writer and futurist H.G. Wells promoted cosmopolitanism and offered blueprints for a world revolution and world brain to establish a technocratic world state and planned economy. Wells warned, however, in his 1940 book The New World Order that, when the struggle seems to be drifting definitely towards a world social democracy, there may still be very great delays and disappointments before it becomes an efficient and beneficent world system. Countless people will hate the New World Order, be rendered unhappy by the frustration of their passions and ambitions through its advent, and will die protesting against it. When we attempt to evaluate its promise, we have to bear in mind the distress of a generation or so of malcontents, many of them quite gallant and graceful-looking people. Wells's books were influential in giving a second meaning to the term New World Order, which would only be used by state socialist supporters and anti-communist opponents for generations to come. However, despite the popularity and notoriety of his ideas, Wells failed to exert a deeper and more lasting influence because he was unable to concentrate his energies on a direct appeal to intelligentsias who would ultimately have to coordinate the Wellsian New World Order. British neo-theosophical occultist Alice Bailey, one of the founders of the so-called New Age movement, prophesied in 1940 the eventual victory of the Allies of World War II over the Axis powers, which occurred in 1945, and the establishment by the Allies of a political and religious New World Order. She saw a federal world government as the culmination of Wells's open conspiracy, but favourably argued that it would be synergist because it was guided by the masters of the ancient wisdom, intent on preparing humanity for the mystical second coming of Christ and the dawning of the age of Aquarius. According to Bailey, a group of ascended masters called the Great White Brotherhood works on the inner planes to oversee the transition to the New World Order, but for now, the members of this spiritual hierarchy are only known to a few occult scientists, with whom they communicate telepathically. But as the need for their personal involvement in the plan increases, there will be an externalization of the hierarchy, and everyone will know of their presence on Earth. Bailey's writings, along with American writer Marilyn Ferguson's 1980 book The Aquarian Conspiracy, contributed to theorists of the Christian right viewing the New Age movement as the false religion that would supersede Christianity in a New World Order. Skeptics argue that the term New Age movement is a misnomer, generally used by theorists as a catch-all rubric for any new religious movement that is not fundamentalist Christian. By this logic, anything that is not Christian is by definition actively and willfully anti-Christian. Paradoxically, since the first decade of the 21st century, New World Order conspiracism is increasingly being embraced and propagandized by New Age occultists, who are people bored by rationalism and drawn to stigmatized knowledge, such as alternative medicine, astrology, quantum mysticism, spiritualism, and theosophy. Thus, New Age theorists, such as the makers of documentary films like Esoteric Agenda, claim that globalists who plot on behalf of the New World Order are simply misusing occultists for Machiavellian ends, such as adopting December 12, 2012 as the exact date for the establishment of the New World Order for the purpose of taking advantage of the growing 2012 phenomenon, which has its origins in the fringe Mayanist theories of New Age writers Jose Arguelles, Terence McKenna, and Daniel Pinchbeck. Skeptics argue that the connection of theorists and occultists follows from their fallacious premises. First, any widely accepted belief must necessarily be false. Second, stigmatized knowledge, which the establishment spurns, must be true. The result is a large self-referential network in which, for example, some UFO religionists promote anti-Jewish phobias, while some anti-Semites practice Peruvian shamanism. Theorists often use the term Fourth Reich simply as a pejorative synonym for the New World Order to imply that its state ideology and government will be similar to Germany's Third Reich. Theorists such as American writer Jim Marrs claim that some ex-Nazis who survived the fall of the Greater German Reich, along with sympathizers in the United States and elsewhere, given haven by organizations like Odessa and Die Spin, have been working behind the scenes since the end of World War II to enact at least some principles of Nazism, like militarism, imperialism, widespread spying on citizens, corporatism, the use of propaganda to manufacture a national consensus, into culture, government, and business worldwide, but primarily in the US. They cite the influence of ex-Nazi scientists brought in under Operation Paperclip to help advance aerospace manufacturing in the US with technological principles from Nazi UFOs and the acquisition and creation of conglomerates by ex-Nazis and their sympathizers after the war in both Europe and the US. This neo-Nazi plan is said to be animated by an iron dream in which the American Empire, having thwarted the Judeo-Masonic plot and overthrown its Zionist occupation government, gradually establishes a Fourth Reich formerly known as the Western Imperium, a pan-Aryan world empire modelled after Adolf Hitler's New Order, which reverses the decline of the West and ushers a golden age of white supremacy. Skeptics argue that theorists grossly overestimate the influence of ex-Nazis and neo-Nazis on American society, and point out that political repression at home and imperialism abroad have a long history in the United States that predates the 20th century. Some political scientists, such as Sheldon Wolin, have expressed concern that the twin forces of democratic deficit and superpower status have paved the way in the US for the emergence of an inverted totalitarianism which contradicts many principles of Nazism. Since the late 1970s, extraterrestrials from other habitable planets or parallel dimensions, such as Greys, and intraterrestrials from Hollow Earth, such as reptilians, have been included in the New World Order plan in more or less dominant roles, as in the theories put forward by American writers Stan Deyo and Milton William Cooper and British writer David Icke. British writer David Icke claims that shape-shifting aliens called reptilians control the Earth. The common theme in these theories is that aliens have been among us for decades, centuries, or millennia, but a government cover-up enforced by Men in Black has shielded the public from knowledge of a secret alien invasion. Motivated by speciesism and imperialism, these aliens have been and are secretly manipulating developments and changes in human society in order to more efficiently control and exploit human beings. In some theories, alien infiltrators have shapeshifted into human form and move freely throughout human society, even to the point of taking control of command positions in governmental, corporate, and religious institutions, and are now in the final stages of their plan to take over the world. A mythical covert government agency of the United States, code-named Majestic 12, is often imagined being the shadow government which collaborates with the alien occupation and permits alien abductions, in exchange for assistance in the development and testing of military flying saucers at Area 51, in order for the United States Armed Forces to achieve full-spectrum dominance. Skeptics, who adhere to the psychosocial hypothesis for unidentified flying objects, argue that the convergence of New World Order theory and UFO theory is a product of not only the era's widespread mistrust of governments and the popularity of the extraterrestrial hypothesis for UFOs, but of the far-right and ufologists actually joining forces. Barker notes that the only positive side to this development is that if plotters plotting to rule the world are believed to be aliens, traditional human scapegoats, such as Freemasons, Illuminati, and Jews, are downgraded or exonerated. Theorists of the Christian right, starting with British revisionist historian Nestor Helen Webster, believe there is an ancient occult scheme, started by the first mystagogues of Gnosticism and perpetuated by their alleged esoteric successors, such as the Kabbalists, Cathars, Knights Templar, Hermeticists, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and ultimately the Illuminati, which seeks to subvert the Judeo-Christian foundations of the Western world and implement the New World Order through a one-world religion that prepares the masses to embrace the Imperial cult of the Antichrist. More broadly, they speculate that globalists who plot on behalf of a New World Order are directed by occult agencies of some sort, unknown superiors, spiritual hierarchies, demons, fallen angels, or Lucifer. They believe that these plotters use the power of occult sciences, symbols, rituals, monuments, buildings, and facilities to advance their plot to rule the world. So who rules the world? Who is pulling the strings? Are there even strings to pull? The truth is, we will probably never know. Idealistically, things should work as they are meant to, out in the open without any need for shadows. However, even the brightest of lights cannot help to cast a shadow somewhere, and who knows what could be living in that little sliver of the unknown.